So it's finally time to talk about one of my favorite iPhones that I think I'm going to be talking a lot about in 2022, and that is the iPhone XR. I actually purchased this phone the first day it came out many years ago in 2018, and Apple actually just stopped selling it brand new, and I've had a long history with this device, a lot of ups, a lot of downs, but as of right now, I love this phone and I still think it's a very good device for the most part. If you want to pick up this iPhone and maybe some other iPhones I'd recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now this device, without a doubt, is still a very good looking phone. When you look at an iPhone XR and an iPhone 13, there are still so many similarities. Of course, the newer ones have flat sides and all that good stuff, but this device still looks very good and I have very few things to complain about. Now the front of this phone, you do have that 6.1-inch IPS panel. Now it's not an OLED display like the newer ones, but it's still not a bad panel. You know, I thought it was going to be a big deal the first time I bought it, but it really hasn't been, and there are still some advantages, not a lot, but there are still some advantages for an IPS panel. And I do think with the lack of bezel and with the notch, it actually makes this thing look super current. When you look at the iPhone 13s, those things look pretty much the same thing as this one for the most part, at least on the front. So I still think this phone looks pretty good for the most part. Lightning port at the bottom. You can get this iPhone in many different colors as well. I've gotten it in blue, I think white the first time, and now I have it in blue again, or black or something like that, I don't remember. But a lot of colors you can buy this thing in, which is so beautiful. And we do have glass on the back, which still makes this phone feel extremely premium. When I hold this thing and I hold something like that base iPhone 13, it still feels fairly like the same thing. Of course, the 13 feels more premium, but this thing has a good heft to it. It's a good size, and I actually do think it's still a pretty good feeling phone nowadays. Now, we might as well talk about the camera setup on this thing too. This thing has a single camera setup on the back and has a single camera setup on the front. So on the back, 12 megapixel sensor. You can do 4K at 60 videos on it, which is really nice. On the front, you do have a 7 megapixel standard lens, and you can do 1080p at 60. Unfortunately, you can't do 4K on the front, but it's still perfectly fine, and I don't really have too much to complain about with this specific camera. You know, the back camera of this thing, my only complaint is that it doesn't have a dual camera or triple camera setup, but even the single camera setup that it has is still really good. When it first came out, I compared it to a bunch of different phones, including the iPhone 8 Plus and the iPhone 10 at the time, and I found that the iPhone XR's camera was kind of better than those devices, even though it had a single camera setup. And even now, I've recently done a lot more camera comparisons and speed comparisons and all that good stuff, and still I think the iPhone XR is a very good camera for the price tag. Now, I'm not saying this phone is a better camera than the 13 Pro or anything, but for the price that you're paying for, it's really not a bad, camera, I think, and I think that's the best way to explain it. And another good thing is with all these applications that I use on a daily basis, things like Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok, if I'm trying to film a video on those, apps, all those apps are suited for iPhones for the most part. They kind of make those photos and videos look better in a way, which is really good. So even if you have an old iPhone, this isn't really that old, it still makes the camera quality a little bit better. So I would say the camera on this thing is still pretty good for 2022 standards, and I definitely do think it's more of an asset for sure. Now, another big thing about the iPhone XR is actually the software. This device is going to be getting, continued software support for many more years. This thing came out in 2018. It's kind of approaching 4 years old as of this point, and this thing is not going to be ending anytime soon. Apple was just selling it brand new just last year, like a couple months ago, so I don't think they're going to cut end support, for this thing anytime soon. So for many more years, you're still going to be fine for the most part. If you're worried about this thing not getting any iOS updates for the time being for in the near future, that is not going to be the case. You are going to be getting a very long-lasting phone from this thing, without a doubt, for sure, I can guarantee you. I would probably say iOS 17 or iOS 18 is probably going to be one of the last updates, this phone's going to get, and we're currently on iOS 15, and we pretty much are like halfway through with that one. So I definitely say this is still a very long-lasting phone for sure. Now, another big thing to keep in mind is that with the iOS 15 update this thing just got, it did kind of have a rocky start, but it's going to get better throughout time. So I want to say by the midway through this year, when iOS 15 kind of starts finishing up, I think it's going to be a very stable version of software. And iOS 16 could be bringing a lot more features based on some of the rumors are suggesting. So I think overall still a pretty good phone in terms of software, and it's definitely not going anywhere anytime soon. Now, another big thing about this phone is the performance. This thing has that Apple A12 Bionic chip inside of it with 3 gigabytes of RAM, and really anything I've ever done with this iPhone, it still performs very well. I've done a lot of videos, even more recently on my second channel, about this iPhone, not really about it, but if I'm filming tutorials and certain things like that, which whichever iPhone is the closest, I just go and use it. And that iPhone is normally the one I would pick up, mostly the newest ones, but this iPhone still has made it in a lot of videos. But another thing is within any time a new phone comes out, I almost always compare it against this one, and that includes the S21s that came out this year or last year, the OnePlus 9s, the Galaxy 52, the iPhone 13s, so many phones that came out, and the iPhone XR does a great job at the performance that it has. And I'm talking about anything you're going to do for the most part, this device does a great job at, and I think that's a humongous asset for sure. If you're planning on buying something like an iPhone XR, you're going to be getting a very smooth performing phone, and it's still very solid in so many different ways. Is it perfect? Probably not. There are some glitched frames here and there and some slowdowns here and there, but for an everyday person doing everyday tasks like me, this is a perfect performing phone still. Now it does kind of slow down a little bit if we're comparing it to an iPhone 13. Of course, the iPhone 13s are going to be faster at app opening, but once those apps are open, for the most part, they kind of handle things fairly the same, so I haven't had too many complaints about that. So I'll definitely say in terms of that standpoint, perfectly fine. Now I am going to start gaming on this phone a little bit more on my third channel, so I'm going to be gaming on a ton of different iPhones. So if you want to see a little bit more in depth about the heavy intensive games, you may want to lock it down on my third channel for that. But kind of synopsize the last year, this phone's been performing fairly well. Anytime I play things like PUBG or any type of like bigger game like that, it kind of handles on this phone as you'd expect. It really depends a lot on those network connections, but it's still a very good performing phone, and I've had very few issues with it. So again, unless you're planning on doing super intensive, crazy 4K video editing on this phone, and you want to do some gaming on the back end when you're doing like multitasking or whatever, that may be when you're going to start running into some hiccups, but really you're going to experience those hiccups on the iPhone 13 as well. So I still think this is a pretty decent performing phone for the price tag, and that pretty much covers it up in the performance standpoint. Now the battery life is another pretty big asset about this phone. 2,942 mAh battery, that's still a very large size battery to have on a device like this, and as I've mentioned before, when you're getting a phone like this, you may be expecting this phone to not have the best battery life of all time, and it definitely doesn't, but it's still a very good battery life. Definitely something like the iPhone 13 Pro Max is going to be better, but when this phone first came out, the battery life was great. It still is fairly good, but I would probably recommend picking up something like an iPhone, 11 or iPhone, 13 Pro Max if you're wanting the best battery life, but this is still a pretty decent sized battery, and iOS 15 has hindered the battery life a little bit, but it's going to get better throughout time. I have a feeling it's going to be like iOS 14, so even though it may be rocky now, it's going to get better throughout time, at least in my opinion. So in terms of battery life, that covers it up there. And to kind of sum up this video, man, to be honest, the iPhone XR is still one of my favorite phones in 2022. It's really good in so many different ways. It's a great budget phone, but also if you currently own it, I would still recommend you to keep it. I mean, this thing has a great build quality, beautiful 6.1-inch IPS panel that's still very good. You have Face ID, you have glass back, wireless charging, IP certification, amazing camera setup, I still think, on the front and the back of this phone. The performance is still very good on this phone as well, and it's going to be supported for many, many more years to come. And the best part is, you can get this thing up for like a couple $100, and that's the most important thing. This, if it was $1,000 phone, it probably wouldn't be that good, but the fact that it's around a $300 price tag right now makes this thing a pretty decent value in my opinion. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.